you think war is where genius generals pit their wits against each other on a tactical map, where courage is etched into history books? Forget that romanticized notion. The naked truth of human history is actually a long series of extreme comedy sketches. We are talking about moments where nations almost destroyed world peace over a pig, where humanity declared war on flightless birds and lost, and, most humiliating of all, where 8,000 fully armed soldiers were defeated by a swarm of angry bees. Welcome to the Chronicles of Absurdity, where we peel back the layers of military events that play out like bad, dark comedy scripts. And to understand just how fragile human dignity is in the face of nature, let's start our journey in East Africa during World War I with the infamous Battle of Tanga. The year was 1914. The British Empire decided to launch an amphibious assault on the German colony in modern-day Tanzania. On paper, it looked like an easy victory. The British brought 8,000 troops, mostly from India, equipped with modern rifles and machine guns. They vastly outnumbered the small German defense force led by General Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck. But the British commander, Major General Aitken, was a man whose arrogance was only matched by his incompetence. He refused to send scouts to reconnoiter the landing zone, believing the Germans would just surrender at the sight of the British fleet. Instead of a smooth march, General Aitken ordered his troops to advance through thick mangroves and dense swamps. As the soldiers hacked their way through the bush, firing their weapons and stomping their heavy boots, they committed a fatal error. They disturbed the locals. And by locals, I don't mean people. I mean hundreds of angry swarms of African killer bees nesting in old logs and hanging hives. The noise of the battle agitated the insects, and they decided to launch a counterattack. The bees did not care about politics. They stung Germans and British alike, but the British were the ones stuck in the thick vegetation. Suddenly, the battlefield turned into a farce. Soldiers who were trained to face machine gun fire dropped their weapons and began flailing their arms wildly. The buzzing air force attacked their eyes, ears, and noses. The panic was absolute. The British line collapsed completely, not because of German artillery, but because of insect stings. Men were seen screaming and running into the ocean to submerge themselves. The Times of London later ran a headline, "The Battle of the Bees." It was a crushing defeat, where a global superpower was humbled by the local wildlife. If the British failed because their enemy was too small and numerous, the Australians in 1932 proved that you can also lose when the enemy is big and fast. This brings us to the Great Emu War. After World War I, Australian veterans were given land to farm in Western Australia. But soon, a migration of 20,000 emus descended upon their fields. These 2-meter-tall birds treated the wheat crops like a buffet, destroying fences and livelihoods. The veterans asked the government for help, and the Minister of Defense sent Major G.P.W. Meredith with machine guns and 10,000 rounds of ammunition. They thought it would be a massacre. It turned out to be a humiliation. As soon as the soldiers opened fire, the emus split into small groups and ran in chaotic zigzag patterns, making them impossible to target. Major Meredith was shocked to find that the birds could take multiple bullets and keep running, leading him to say they had the invulnerability of tanks. The army even tried mounting guns on trucks to chase them, but the terrain was too rough and the birds were too fast. After wasting thousands of rounds of ammunition to kill only a handful of birds, the Australian army retreated. The emus won. Humans, 0. Nature, 2. So, nature is a formidable enemy. But sometimes you don't need bees or birds to defeat you. Sometimes you just need a bottle of schnapps. Welcome to the Battle of Karánsebes in 1788, where 10,000 Austrian soldiers were killed or wounded without seeing a single enemy. During the Austro-Turkish War, the Austrian army was marching at night. The vanguard cavalry didn't find any Turks, but they found some Romani people selling schnapps. They bought it all and started a party. When the infantry arrived and asked for a drink, the cavalry refused. A shot was fired. In the drunken confusion, someone shouted, "Turchi, Turchi," meaning the Turks are coming. Because the Austrian army spoke many different languages, when German officers shouted, "Halt," others heard, "Allah." Panic exploded. Soldiers shot at their own comrades, artillery fired into their own camp, and the emperor himself fell into a creek while fleeing.
2 days later, the real Ottoman army arrived to find 10,000 dead Austrians and simply took the city. They didn't have to fire a single shot. Alcohol blurs reason, but what explains 2,000 men dying for a bucket? This is the War of the Bucket in 1325 in Italy. The city-states of Modena and Bologna were rivals. One night, Modena soldiers sneaked into Bologna and stole an oak bucket from a well. Bologna demanded it back. Modena refused. Bologna declared war. 32,000 Bologna troops attacked 7,000 Modena defenders. Despite being outnumbered, Modena won the Battle of Zappolino. 2,000 people died, all for a bucket that you can still see hanging in Modena today. From buckets to livestock, let's end this part with the Pig War of 1859 between the US and the UK. An American farmer on San Juan Island shot a British-owned pig that was eating his potatoes. The British demanded justice. The US sent the army. The British sent warships. For weeks, 2 nuclear powers of the 19th century stood ready to slaughter each other over a dead pig. Thankfully, the British admiral refused to fire, saying it was foolish to start a war over a pig. The only casualty was the pig. If the previous stories made you suspect that humanity has a knack for turning minor inconveniences into major catastrophes, then this next part will confirm that suspicion with absolute certainty. We're moving from animal enemies to wars sparked by sporting events, baked goods, and an army that achieved the mathematical impossibility of suffering negative casualties. Let's start with a heartwarming palate cleanser amidst all this violence: the story of the Liechtenstein army in 1866. If you look at military history, the definition of a successful campaign is usually one where you achieve your objective with minimum casualties. But the tiny principality of Liechtenstein redefined success in a way that no superpower could ever dream of. During the Austro-Prussian War, Liechtenstein, being an ally of Austria, was obligated to send troops. They scraped together an army of 80 men. Their mission was simple: guard the Brenner Pass against the Italians. Now, you might expect a story of a heroic last stand like the 300 Spartans, but Liechtenstein had a different philosophy: live and let live. They marched to the pass, sat there, enjoyed the scenery, drank some wine, and generally avoided shooting anyone. The war ended pretty quickly with Austria's defeat, so the Liechtensteiners packed up to go home. Here is the punchline: they left with 80 men, but they marched back into their capital of Vaduz with 81 men. No, one of them didn't give birth. Apparently, they had made friends with an Austrian liaison officer, or an Italian defector, depending on which legend you believe, who decided that hanging out with these chill guys was way better than fighting a war, so he just joined their squad. It is the only recorded instance in military history of a unit having a negative casualty rate. They went to war and came back with a net profit in human life. From the most wholesome army, we unfortunately have to pivot to the most passionate and violent one, fueled by the world's favorite sport. Welcome to the football war of 1969 between El Salvador and Honduras. Usually, when your team loses a match, you might cry, break a TV, or argue with strangers on the internet. But in Central America, they decided to launch airstrikes. To be fair, tensions between the two nations were already boiling over land reform and immigration issues. Honduras had started deporting Salvadoran farmers, creating a humanitarian crisis. But the match that lit the fuse was a qualifier for the 1970 FIFA World Cup. It was a 3-game series. The first game in Honduras saw Salvadoran fans beaten up. The second game in El Salvador saw the Honduran team needing armored vehicles to get to the stadium because the crowd was so hostile. By the third decisive game in Mexico City, the atmosphere was more toxic than a nuclear wasteland. El Salvador won in extra time, and immediately after, diplomatic ties were severed. On July 14, 1969, the El Salvadoran Air Force attacked targets inside Honduras. For 100 hours, two nations fought a bloody war with vintage World War II planes, killing roughly 3,000 people. It is often called the 100-Hour War, but the Football War is the name that stuck, serving as a grim reminder that sometimes soccer is not just a game, it's a catalyst for geopolitical explosion. Speaking of explosions sparked by trivial things, let's talk about French cuisine. We all know the French take their food seriously, but did you know they once invaded Mexico because of a bakery? This is the Pastry War of 1838.
Mexico, in the early years of its independence, was a chaotic place with constant coups and riots. During one of these lootings in Mexico City, a French pastry chef named Remontel had his shop trashed by Mexican officers. He complained to the Mexican government, demanding compensation, but they essentially laughed in his face, probably saying something like, "Let them eat cake, but pay for it yourself." Remontel didn't give up. He wrote to King Louis Philippe of France. The king, seeing an opportunity to assert French dominance and collect some overdue debts, demanded Mexico pay an exorbitant 600,000 pesos. When Mexico refused, France didn't send a health inspector. They sent a naval fleet to blockade the port of Veracruz and bombard the fortress of San Juan de Ulua. This war also marked the return of the legendary Mexican general Santa Anna. He led the defense and, in a dramatic turn of events, had his leg blown off by French cannon fire. The war ended with Mexico agreeing to pay the money, but the real comedy happened later. Santa Anna held a full military funeral with state honors for his severed leg. Yes, he buried his leg like a war hero. The pastry war proves that you should never, ever mess with a Frenchman's croissant, or you might end up paying for it with your national treasury and a limb. If a baker can start a war, why not a dog? In 1925, Greece and Bulgaria were at each other's throats, carrying the baggage of the Second Balkan War and World War I. The border was a tense line of barbed wire and nervous soldiers. The incident at Petrich, also known as the War of the Stray Dog, began in the most Looney Tunes way possible. According to the story, a Greek soldier's dog ran away from him and crossed the border into Bulgaria. The soldier, perhaps forgetting that he was in a geopolitical powder keg, ran after his dog. Bulgarian sentries saw a Greek soldier running towards them and, following protocol, shot him dead. Greece demanded an apology and compensation. Bulgaria refused, saying the soldier invaded their territory. Technically true, even if he was just chasing a puppy. The Greek dictator, Theodoros Pangalos, ordered an invasion. Greek troops marched into Bulgaria, occupied the town of Petrich, and prepared to shell it. It took the intervention of the League of Nations to stop the madness. They ordered Greece to withdraw and pay an indemnity to Bulgaria. So, roughly 50 people died because a dog decided to go for a walk. We never found out what happened to the dog, but we can assume it was a very bad boy. Finally, let's end this part with a conflict that serves as the antidote to all this violence. If the War of the Stray Dog was stupid and bloody, the Whiskey War between Canada and Denmark was stupid and incredibly polite. This dispute revolved around Hans Island, a barren rock between Canada and Greenland. Both nations wanted it, but instead of shooting each other, they fought with alcohol. In 1984, Danish troops landed, planted a flag, and left a bottle of schnapps with a note, "Welcome to the Danish island." When Canadians arrived, they swapped the flag and left a bottle of Canadian Club whiskey with a note, "Welcome to Canada." This passive-aggressive exchange continued for nearly 40 years. Google Maps didn't know who owned the island because it depended on who had last visited for a drink.
Finally, in 2022, they agreed to split the island in half. It remains the most civilized war in history, proving that if you have enough liquor, you don't need bullets. We have witnessed wars that dragged on for days due to stubbornness, and wars that exploded because of a soccer match. But now we must turn our attention to the concept of efficiency. If you are the type of person who likes to get things done quickly so you can go back to napping, you will appreciate the Anglo-Zanzibar War of 1896. It holds the Guinness World Record for being the shortest war in history. The entire conflict lasted between 38 and 45 minutes. That is less time than it takes to watch an episode of a TV drama, and certainly less time than it takes to get a pizza delivered on a Friday night. The drama began when the pro-British Sultan of Zanzibar died, and his cousin, Khalid bin Bargash, decided to seize the throne without asking for British permission. The British Empire, which essentially treated Zanzibar as a client state, was not amused. They had their own preferred candidate, and they didn't like Khalid's attitude.
They sent him a polite but firm ultimatum: step down by 9 a.m. on August 27th, or we will open fire. Khalid, perhaps believing the British were bluffing or overestimating his palace walls, replied, "We have no intention of hauling down our flag, and we do not believe you would open fire on us." He was wrong. At 9 a.m. sharp, the ultimatum expired. At 9:02 a.m., 3 British cruisers and 2 gunboats in the harbor unleashed hell. The bombardment was so intense and precise that the Sultan's palace was reduced to rubble within minutes. By 9:40 a.m., the shelling stopped because the Sultan's flag had been shot down. But here is the funniest part. The brave Sultan Khalid, who had talked so tough, was the first one to flee the scene, seeking asylum in the German consulate, while his soldiers were still dying. The casualty count was roughly 500 killed or wounded on the Zanzibar side, and exactly 1 British sailor injured. The British then installed their puppet sultan, and everything went back to normal before lunch. It was a masterclass in colonial bullying and military punctuality. If 38 minutes is too fast for you, let's swing the pendulum to the absolute opposite extreme. Prepare yourself for the 335 years war between the Netherlands and the Isles of Scilly, a small archipelago off the coast of Cornwall, UK. This conflict holds the record for being the longest war in history and also the safest because not a single shot was fired and nobody died. The war started in 1651 during the English Civil War. The Netherlands Navy chose to side with the parliamentarians, Oliver Cromwell's crew, because the Royalists had been raiding Dutch ships. When the Royalists were pushed back to their last stronghold on the Isles of Scilly, the other naval admiral, Martin Tromp, showed up and demanded reparations. When he didn't get paid, he declared war specifically on the Isles of Scilly, not on the whole of England. Shortly after, the Royalists surrendered to the parliamentarians. The Dutch Navy, seeing the job was done, sailed home. However, due to a bureaucratic oversight that can only be described as epic, they forgot to officially sign a peace treaty with the Isles of Scilly. The war technically remained active on paper. Centuries passed, empires rose and fell, the Industrial Revolution happened, 2 world wars were fought, and technically the Dutch were still at war with Scilly. It wasn't until 1986 that a historian named Roy Duncan noticed this anomaly. He contacted the Dutch embassy, who checked their files and said, "Oh right, whoops." The Dutch ambassador flew to the islands and a peace treaty was signed on April 17, 1986. The war lasted 335 years without a single drop of blood spilled, proving that procrastination is the most powerful force in international relations. Speaking of powerful forces, let's talk about Napoleon Bonaparte. He is widely considered one of the greatest military geniuses in human history, a man who conquered Europe and reshaped the world. Yet, in 1807, after signing the treaties of Tilsit, the Emperor of France suffered a humiliating defeat at the paws of a fluffy, adorable enemy, a horde of rabbits. To celebrate the treaty, Napoleon's chief of staff, Alexandre Berthier, organized a rabbit hunt. He acquired roughly 3,000 rabbits and released them in a field for Napoleon and his generals to shoot. The problem lay in Berthier's procurement strategy. Instead of catching wild hares, which would have instinctively run away from humans, Berthier bought tame farm rabbits. When the cages were opened, the rabbits didn't see a firing squad, they saw the people who usually fed them. So, instead of fleeing, 3,000 hungry bunnies charged toward Napoleon, hoping for carrots and lettuce. The hunting party laughed at first, but the laughter died when the swarm engulfed the emperor. They climbed up his legs, chewed on his coat, and nipped at his boots. Napoleon, the man who stared down the Russian winter and the British Navy, was forced to flee to his carriage. The rabbits reportedly divided into 2 wings and flanked the carriage, continuing the chase. It was a tactical maneuver that Napoleon himself would have been proud of had he not been the victim. From rabbits attacking legs, we move to a war started by a missing ear. This is the War of Jenkins' Ear, a conflict between Britain and Spain that began in 1739. The name sounds like a joke, but it is historically accurate. The catalyst was Robert Jenkins, a British merchant captain. In 1731, his ship was boarded by the Spanish Coast Guard near Havana.
The Spanish commander, accusing Jenkins of smuggling, sliced off Jenkins' left ear with a sword and told him to take it to the King of England. Jenkins didn't just go home and cry, he pickled his severed ear in a jar of alcohol and kept it. 8 years later, yes, 8 years, when tensions between Britain and Spain were rising over trade rights, Jenkins was invited to the House of Commons. He dramatically produced the jar with the shriveled ear floating inside. The British politicians and public were outraged. The sight of a British ear in a Spanish jar was too much to bear. War was declared. This conflict lasted 9 years and resulted in thousands of deaths and the loss of hundreds of ships. It eventually merged into the larger war of the Austrian succession. All of that destruction sparked by a piece of cartilage that had been sitting on a shelf for nearly a decade. If fighting over an ear seems petty, imagine fighting 3 wars over fish. The Cod Wars, 1950s to 1970s, were a series of confrontations between the United Kingdom and Iceland. This was a classic David versus Goliath scenario. The UK had the mighty Royal Navy, Iceland had no army, and a coast guard that consisted of a few converted trawlers. The dispute was simple. Iceland wanted to expand its exclusive fishing zone to protect its cod stocks, which were the backbone of its economy. The UK wanted to keep fishing there because British people love their fish and chips. Every time Iceland expanded its limit from 4 to 12, then to 50, then to 200 miles, the UK refused to recognize it. The Royal Navy was sent to protect British fishing boats. You had destroyers and frigates facing off against tiny Icelandic patrol boats. It was like a monster truck trying to fight a bicycle. But the Icelanders were creative. They invented a device called the net cutter, a hook dragged behind their boats that would sever the expensive trawl wires of British ships, sending the nets and the catch to the bottom of the ocean. The ships also engaged in dangerous ramming contests in the freezing North Atlantic. Despite being outgunned, Iceland had a secret weapon, the Cold War. Iceland hosted a critical NATO base at Keflavik. Every time the UK got too aggressive, Iceland threatened to leave NATO and kick the Americans out. Terrified of losing their strategic outpost to the Soviets, the US pressured the UK to back down. Iceland won all 3 Cod Wars. The 200-mile exclusive economic zone became the international standard, and the British fishing industry in distant waters collapsed. It remains the only time in history that a nation without a military defeated a major naval power by threatening to close a base and cutting some ropes. If you thought the Cod Wars were the peak of maritime absurdity, prepare to be disappointed.
because we are about to descend into a level of incompetence and confusion that makes the previous stories look like strategic masterpieces. We are entering the territory of World War II, a conflict known for its industrial scale and horror, but even in the darkest times, humanity found a way to be unintentionally hilarious. Let's talk about Operation Cottage in 1943, also known as the Invasion of Kiska. The US and Canadian forces were determined to retake the Aleutian Islands from the Japanese. Intelligence reports suggested that Kiska Island was heavily fortified, with thousands of Japanese troops. The Allies didn't want to take any chances. They assembled a massive invasion force of over 35,000 soldiers, supported by battleships and heavy bombers. They bombarded the island for weeks, turning the volcanic rock into a cratered moonscape. On D-Day, the troops landed through thick, freezing fog. Tension was high. Every shadow looked like a sniper. Every noise sounded like an ambush. Firefights broke out. Immediately, soldiers reported tracer fire, explosions, and shadowy figures moving in the mist. For 2 days, the battle raged. When the smoke finally cleared, the casualty report was grim. Over 300 Allied soldiers were dead or wounded. A U.S. destroyer, the USS Abner Reed, struck a mine and suffered heavy damage. It was a hard-fought victory. But there was just one small problem. There were no Japanese on the island. Not a single one. The Japanese had secretly evacuated their entire garrison under the cover of fog 2 weeks before the invasion even started. They had left behind nothing but booby traps, a few dogs, and a sign that essentially said, "We are gone, idiots." The 300 Allied casualties were entirely due to friendly fire, booby traps, and frostbite. American soldiers had spent 2 days shooting at Canadian soldiers who were shooting back while everyone was shooting at imaginary Japanese ghosts.
It remains the only battle in history where an army suffered hundreds of casualties and lost a ship to an enemy that wasn't even there. From a tactical standpoint, it was the perfect Japanese victory. They inflicted maximum damage without firing a shot. While Operation Cottage was a story of tragic errors, the battle for Castle Itter is a story so bizarre it sounds like bad fan fiction. It took place in Austria on May 5, 1945, just days before Germany surrendered. Castle Itter was being used as a VIP prison, housing high-profile French prisoners, including former prime ministers and tennis stars. When the SS guards fled, the prisoners were left undefended against wandering SS units who were executing everyone they saw. The prisoners managed to send a distress signal, which was picked up by an American tank commander, Captain Jack Lee. But Lee only had 1 tank and a handful of men. On his way to the castle, he encountered a group of Wehrmacht soldiers, the regular German army, led by Major Josef Gangl, who had defected and wanted to help fight the SS. So, you had the wildest team-up in history: American GIs, German Wehrmacht soldiers, and French VIP prisoners who grabbed weapons from the armory, all fighting side by side against the Waffen-SS. They holed up in the castle. The SS attacked with overwhelming numbers and artillery. The American tank, named Besottin Jenny, was blown up at the gate. During the firefight, former French Prime Minister Paul Reynaud was spotted sprinting across the courtyard under fire to get ammunition. It was chaos. Just as they were about to be overrun, Allied reinforcements arrived and scattered the SS. It was the only time in World War II that Americans and Germans fought as allies. Major Gangl died protecting the French Prime Minister and is honored as a hero in Austria today. It's a battle that proves the enemy of my enemy is my friend, even if my friend was shooting at me last week. From the mountains of Austria, let's travel back to 1797 for the last invasion of Britain. This is the Battle of Fishguard. The French revolutionary government decided to invade Britain to stir up a rebellion. They sent a force known as the Black Legion, commanded by an Irish-American named Colonel Tate. The Legion was scraped from the bottom of the barrel, mostly consisting of convicts and prisoners of war who were promised freedom if they fought. They landed near Fishguard in Wales. Discipline broke down immediately. The French soldiers found a shipwrecked Portuguese vessel loaded with wine and proceeded to get blackout drunk. They spent more time looting farmhouses for food and booze than preparing for battle. The local British militia was small and poorly organized, but they had a secret weapon: Welsh fashion. Hundreds of local Welsh women came out to the cliffs to see what was happening. At the time, the traditional dress for Welsh women included a bright red shawl and a tall black hat. From a distance, through the eyes of hungover and drunk French soldiers, these women looked exactly like British redcoat infantry regiments with their tall shako hats. Panic spread through the French ranks. Believing they were outnumbered by the regular British army, Colonel Tate surrendered unconditionally. He handed over his sword to the local commander, completely unaware that he had been frightened into submission by a group of curious ladies in national costume. It was a victory for optical illusions and heavy drinking. Speaking of fighting things that aren't really enemies, we have to talk about Emperor Caligula. The Roman emperor was known for being, let's say, mentally creative. In 40 AD, he marched his legions to the northern coast of Gaul, modern-day France, with the intention of invading Britain. However, the troops were terrified of the mysterious island and the English Channel, so they essentially went on strike. Furious at their cowardice, but needing a victory to bring back to Rome, Caligula declared war on a new enemy, Neptune, the god of the sea. He ordered his soldiers to march to the beach, draw their swords, and attack the waves. You can imagine the confusion of the veteran centurions as they were ordered to stab the ocean. After a furious battle with the tide, which the tide was winning by simply being water, Caligula declared victory. He ordered his men to collect seashells as plunder from the ocean to be displayed in his triumph back in Rome. He even built a lighthouse to commemorate his great victory over the Atlantic. It is the ultimate example of a participation trophy. You didn't conquer Britain, but hey, look at these nice shells.
Finally, let's fast forward to the 1960s for a conflict that combines biology, diplomacy, and seafood. The Lobster War between Brazil and France. The dispute arose when French fishing boats began catching spiny lobsters off the coast of Pernambuco, Brazil. The Brazilian government claimed that lobsters were a crawling species that lived on the continental shelf, and therefore, under the Geneva Convention on the continental shelf, they belonged to Brazil. The French, not wanting to lose their lucrative catch, argued that lobsters swim, and therefore they are fish, which makes them fair game in international waters. This led to a serious diplomatic crisis. Brazil mobilized its navy. France sent a T-53 class destroyer, the Tartu, to protect its fishing boats. The argument got so heated that a Brazilian admiral, Paulo Moreira da Silva, delivered one of the greatest lines in diplomatic history. If the lobster is a fish because it leaps when it is chased, then the kangaroo is a bird. The logic was flawless. The French were stumped. Eventually, to avoid a shooting war, the issue was brought to an international tribunal. The resolution was a classic compromise. The area was expanded to favor Brazil, but France was allowed to catch a certain quota of lobsters for a few years, provided they gave a percentage of the profits to Brazil. The war ended, but the scientific debate about whether a lobster is a swimmer or a crawler remains the funniest legal argument ever presented to a head of state. We have traveled across continents and centuries, witnessing rabbits attacking emperors and buckets causing bloodbaths, but we cannot conclude this saga without visiting the United States, a country where state pride is strong enough to start a civil war over bees. This is the Honey War of 1839 between the states of Iowa and Missouri. The dispute arose from a 9-mile-wide strip of land along the border. Due to a surveyor's error, because apparently nobody in the 19th century knew how to draw a straight line, both states claimed this territory. Things got sticky when a Missouri tax collector tried to do his job in the disputed zone. The residents of Iowa, who didn't take kindly to foreign tax agents, chased him away with pitchforks and arrested him. Missouri's governor, Lilburn Boggs, was furious and called out the militia. But the real spark was when Missourians cut down 3 hollow trees in the disputed area to harvest honey. In the frontier days, honey and beeswax were valuable commodities. The Iowans were outraged by this theft of their natural resources. They mobilized their own militia armed with everything from muskets to garden hose. Both armies marched to the border, ready to die for the sweet nectar. Fortunately, before the first shot could be fired, the U.S. Supreme Court intervened and told them to go home. The border was redrawn, Iowa got the land, and the only casualties were the bees who lost their homes. If fighting over honey sounds petty, how about fighting over a swamp? This brings us to the Toledo War of 1835 between Ohio and Michigan. Both states wanted the Toledo Strip, a narrow piece of land that included the mouth of the Maumee River, which was vital for trade. Ohio, being the older and more politically powerful state, convinced the federal government to give them the land. Michigan, which was just a territory at the time, was led by the boy governor Stevens T. Mason, who was only 23 years old and had a temper to match his age. Mason mobilized the Michigan militia and sent them to arrest any Ohio officials operating in Toledo. The two sides played a game of cat and mouse for months. The violence peaked when a Michigan sheriff stabbed an Ohio officer named Two Stickney, yes, his name was Two, in the thigh with a penknife. It was a flesh wound, but it was treated like an assassination attempt. President Andrew Jackson, tired of this nonsense, stepped in. He proposed a compromise. Ohio would get Toledo, and in exchange, Michigan would be granted statehood and given the Upper Peninsula, a massive chunk of land across Lake Michigan. At the time, Michigan felt cheated, thinking they were given a frozen, useless wasteland. But history loves irony. The Upper Peninsula turned out to be incredibly rich in copper and iron ore, making Michigan fabulously wealthy. Ohio got a swamp, Michigan got a treasure chest. Michigan lost the battle, but won the economic war by a landslide. From land disputes, let's return to the sea for one of the most tragic-comic cases of mistaken identity in naval history. During World War I, Brazil was technically neutral for most of the conflict, but eventually joined the Allies.
The Brazilian Navy was eager to prove itself and hunt down German U-boats in the Atlantic. In 1918, the cruiser Bahia was on patrol near Gibraltar. The crew was on high alert, nerves shattered by stories of invisible German submarines sinking ships without warning. Suddenly, the radar, or rather the lookouts, spotted a disturbance in the water. A periscope. No, multiple periscopes. The commander ordered fire at will. The Bahia unleashed a furious barrage of artillery and machine gun fire into the dark waters. The sea churned with blood. After the smoke cleared, the Brazilians waited for the wreckage of a German submarine to surface. Instead, they saw the floating carcasses of dozens of dolphins. It turns out a large school of porpoises was just passing by, and their dorsal fins were mistaken for periscopes. The Battle of the Porpoises ended with a decisive Brazilian victory over the local marine life. To this day, it remains the only naval engagement where the enemy was entirely cetacean. Speaking of efficiency, we must mention the Kettle War of 1784. This conflict between the Holy Roman Empire, Austria, and the Dutch Republic was over the navigation rights of the Scheldt River. Emperor Joseph II sent 3 ships to break the Dutch blockade. The Dutch sent a ship, the Dolphin, to intercept them. When the Austrian ship Le Louis refused to stop, the Dolphin fired a single cannonball. That single cannonball flew through the air and struck a soup kettle on the deck of the Le Louis. The soup went flying, and the Austrian commander, perhaps terrified by the precision of the Dutch gunnery or simply devastated by the loss of his lunch, immediately surrendered. The entire war consisted of 1 shot and 1 casualty, a kitchen utensil. It is the only war in history named after the sole item destroyed in the conflict. It serves as a reminder that sometimes the most effective way to end a war is to mess with the enemy's food supply. Finally, let's end with a conflict that proves even maps can be weapons of mass confusion: the dispute between Chile and Argentina over the Laguna del Desierto, Desert Lake. For decades, these two neighbors argued over their long mountainous border. The treaties stated the border should follow the highest peaks that divide the waters. This sounds simple until you realize that in the Andes, some rivers change direction and some peaks aren't clearly defined. In 1965, the confusion centered on a lake. Chilean maps showed the lake flowing to the Pacific, making it theirs, while Argentine maps showed it flowing to the Atlantic, making it theirs. Both sides sent gendarmes, militarized police, to the area. They built outposts within shouting distance of each other. The tension exploded when a confusing order led to a firefight, resulting in the death of a Chilean lieutenant named Hernán Merino. He died defending a wooden shack in the middle of nowhere because two governments couldn't agree on which way water flows downhill.
It was a tragic end to a dispute that was essentially a geography exam gone wrong. It reminds us that lines on a map are just ink, but people are willing to bleed for them. And there you have it. From emus defeating machine guns to dolphins being mistaken for submarines, and from wars over pigs to battles over buckets. If this deep dive has taught us anything, it is that history is not a carefully scripted drama written by rational actors. It is an improv comedy show performed by panicked people making terrible decisions under pressure. We like to think of ourselves as a sophisticated species, masters of the atom and explorers of the stars. But deep down, we are still the same creatures who will burn down a city because someone stole our favorite bucket. Perhaps the next time you see a geopolitical crisis on the news, remember, it might not be about freedom or justice. It might just be about a stray dog or a really nice jar of honey. So, the next time you feel like you've made a huge mistake at work, just remember the Austrian army that attacked itself, or the Australian major who lost to a bird. You're doing fine.